Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us over your lunch break today for our event, Managing Pressure and Presence at Work. I'm Katie Kelly. I'm a regional board member for the CMI. I represent CMI Women in London, and I'm also a consultant at Oaklyn, where I lead the people side of mainly large technology transformations. Today, as you can see, I'm joined by a number of other women, all performing a variety of roles at different stages of their careers within professional services organisations. So I'll pass to them shortly to introduce themselves properly, but just give you a bit of background to me and the topic of today as well. So today, during the week of International Women's Day, we're here to talk about how to manage pressure and presence in the workplace. And I think we all recognise that we need to maintain a strong presence in the workplace, but also manage a positive work-life balance too. And as female leaders, I think we recognise this can be extremely tricky. So we're going to share our thoughts on how we navigate that as we go through the event. And this is a topic that I guess has gained a lot more focus over the last couple of years in particular, because we're not all physically present in the office environment, with most of us adopting a hybrid approach. As you can see, some of us are at home today and some of us are in the office too. And as women, our professional services, we also have to navigate not just home or office, we have to navigate being in clients' offices as well, which we'll discuss as we move through the event too. But how do we do this effectively without putting too much pressure on ourselves? That's what we're here to discuss, and we're all going to provide our own perspectives and advice on that topic, as well as answering your questions. We've had lots of pre-submitted questions, which we'll be spending the majority of today answering, and would be really keen to have more of your questions. So please do pop them in the comments section that you can see to the right of your screen. So before I pass to the other panelists, just building on my introduction, as I mentioned, I am on the CMI Women board. I represent London for CMI Women. We aim to empower emerging women leaders to unlock their full potential, something like which events like this aim to do. And as mentioned, I'm also a consultant at Oaklyn, where I focus on change management, the people side of mostly large technology transformations. I did begin my career as an IT project manager about 13 years ago for the Metropolitan Police Service, but quickly realised that it was the people side of change that I was really interested in, rather than the planning, which you still have to do, unfortunately. But it was really actually engaging with people and helping people adopt to change, which is why I moved into consulting. And I spent some time at boutique consulting firms like Oaklyn and bigger global ones like Accenture. And I've been at Oaklyn for about 2.5 years, where I also lead our marketing function and some of our I&D initiatives as well. So that's me in a nutshell. And just to touch on my tip, my advice when thinking about presence, I thought long and hard about this, and immediately you think presence, physical presence, which is also important and we will touch on. My thinking veered onto thinking about executive presence, and something, whether you're a woman or not, we know that some people just seem to exude executive presence and they seem to have some kind of secret sauce, but obviously there's no scientific formula behind how you exude executive presence. But my thinking is, I'm a big fan of mentoring and role modeling and coaching and having people to look up to, especially female leaders. And I think that lots of female leaders I've looked up to and have executive presence, in my opinion, always seem to be authentic. And going back to the topic of pressure as well, I think that if you're not an authentic leader, it can become quite exhausting, and people are more likely to connect with you as a leader if you are genuine. And that's one of our values at Oaklyn as well. So that will be my leaving comment on presence and executive presence in particular, that we should all try and be authentic leaders. So I'll pass now to the other panelists to introduce themselves as well. Nikki, do you want to kick off?
Hello everyone, I'm Nikki Avram. I'm an employment lawyer and the co-founder of Howard Avram Solicitors. It's a London-based commercial law firm. I'm so grateful to be on this panel today because I've lived and breathed the topic, like many of us, I think. Lived and breathed the topic of work-life balance, managing pressure in the workplace for the whole of my working life. And it's just nice to share thoughts, considerations, suggestions with everyone here today. And I've also thought long and hard about this, but I don't have a a silver bullet list, 10 things you can do to achieve optimum work-life balance, presence in the workplace. But I do have a host of experiences, and I'd like to share some of those and the learning points that have come from those life stories. So I'm going to begin with one of those, briefly, one of those life stories. And it probably, in all honesty, doesn't put me in the best light, but it brings into focus, nevertheless, one of those learning points. So about 10, 11 years ago, before Howard Avram, I was meeting with various large law firms with a view to joining as a partner. And before those meetings, I would go through this same ritual. I would remove my wedding rings. I would cleanse myself of the odor of children, as in I didn't want the recruiters, law firms I was meeting with to get any sense of my family life. My goal, of course, was to secure as many of these positions as possible. So I thought the way to do that is go there, present myself as this one-dimensional professional person put on this planet solely to lawyer and build business. And I kept doing that. I just wanted to be judged on my credentials as a professional, kind of shoulder to shoulder with my male counterparts. And of course, I was concerned about the assumption that might be made that I wasn't as dedicated as my male counterparts if I presented myself as this whole package: mother, wife, professional, ambitious woman. And I realized that actually up until that point, for all of my working life, I had created this and presented this stark separation between personal and professional. So I secured some of those positions, and I decided to go down a different path. I decided to go into business with my very good friend, Matthew Howard. And when I did that, I decided to do the complete reverse. I decided to be completely open about, at the time, the fact I wanted a second child. Then when I had the second child, my son Michael, I was just open about the challenges and the chaos that came along with that. But at the same time, I was talking passionately about the business, about the high standard of service that we could provide to our clients. And I was doing that with co-workers, with contacts, with clients, and it just felt healthier. And also, I think it inspired confidence. So thankfully, I think for the better, the landscape has changed a lot over the last 10 years or so, even. And my hope is that women don't feel the need to do what I did during those interviews. But what I've learned from that journey is that I think being open about your life circumstances, your life commitments, is the only way forward. And that's for businesses and individuals, because we all have a life. And that's across the workforce for both men and for women. I think for obvious reasons, women have sometimes or even often felt reluctant to be open about their life circumstances for fear perhaps of the career penalties. Perhaps it stagnates or stalls their career progression, or their sort of fear that there'll be a perception that they're not as dedicated. But absolutely does not translate to a lack of dedication. So the focus, I think, has to be on a manageable work-life balance in a way that still benefits the business. And it may be, proposing simple working arrangements, going in a bit later when you're attending the office, working a 4-day week, but with retained focus on how that's going to benefit the business within that working arrangement. And there should be a boldness about the want to grow, the want to progress, the want to move forward despite any working arrangement. So if, for instance, there's a networking event in the evening, can't make that because of kids, life commitments, or whatever, propose something in the morning or during the day. At organizational level, because there's two sides, individual, organization. At organizational level, big or small, and I've advised the businesses that we act for till I'm blue in the face on this. It's absolutely of no use to have a beautiful standalone glossy equality and diversity policy without training and work underpinning organizational culture. Culture needs to be implemented, of course, within the framework of business objectives, whether it's managers taking a creative approach to learning or just a different approach to promotion, hopefully an unbiased one. I read, I think it might have been on the Mail Online. I read recently this thing about a leaving loudly approach, where companies are encouraging senior executives to leave loudly so that they can pick up their kids or fulfill some other life commitment, and an approach that it won't, making explicit that it won't be frowned upon to discuss life commitments. It's those everyday behaviors, the way that we work, that will determine diversity and inclusion. And I'll finish on this point. I think it's crucial not to deal with this issue superficially, or even just within the context of the pandemic, because the reaction to the pandemic and the way we're working in reaction to that is a movable, changing thing. And it's, it may have destigmatized home working, for instance, but that is a tiny aspect of flexible working. It's a small aspect of our working arrangements. I think it's about fundamentally changing mindset and culture. And the only way I think we do that is by being open about life circumstances without fear of career penalty. And the only way we do that is by organizations taking a customized, communicative, open approach to working arrangements. So yeah, I could go on all day about this, but I think perhaps I should have someone else speak.
Thank you, Nikki. Steph, do you want to go next?
Yeah, hi everybody. My name's Stephanie. I'm a partner here at Oakland. Within the firm, I have a number of different roles, some to look after a number of client accounts, also to look after the operational running of the firm, and I'm also the sponsor of our women's network. I've been here for about 7 years. I started my career in consulting, and then I actually took a career break when I had my children. During that time, I sort of took a little bit of a different path, and I trained to be an acupuncturist, which was fun, but not in the end a career that I decided to pursue. So came back to consulting about 7 years ago. Started at Oakland actually on a part-time basis, and I'm now kind of been promoted in a full-time. Home-wise, I've got 2 children. I've got 2 teenagers. They're 14 and 12. I think the pandemic and the last couple of years has been quite challenging for that age group. And as we're all transitioning back to the office and what that means in terms of working arrangements, they're really transitioning out into kind of what life means and how it means to be outside of the home more, which is challenging. And I think what I've learned with children of that age is as children grow up, they don't need less of your time, they just need a different focus. So I think work-life balance is definitely challenging. I would support what Nikki said in terms of, I think the last 2 years have helped us to be more open about all of the aspects of life. I think everybody having cameras in their homes has really helped that, and having those open conversations about the requirements that you have to support your family as well as work. In terms of recommendations for presence, I think we've been talking quite a lot about this, about the hybrid working and what that means. And for me, I think the thing to remember, especially when hybrid working, is actually to be present. I struggle with it myself sometimes. I find myself on a call and then doing other things, and I'm not actually fully present. And I think as we will retain this hybrid world, and I think that remembering to actually be present with all of your focus is a key point for maintaining presence in a kind of hybrid working environment.
Thank you. Fredy?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. Very excited to be here. I am Fredy. I'm a consultant at J-Man Group. I've been at J-Man for 3.5 years, and we are a consultancy who specialise in helping companies use their data better. And we've worked a bit with Oakland, which is hence why I'm here today. Before that, I studied engineering, so I'm relatively a bit earlier in my career than the rest of the women on the panel. but have also thought quite a lot about the topic, especially with in and out of the pandemic. It's been a hot topic, and in professional services as well, with the obvious pressures that come with that. Definitely something that I'm thinking a lot about, and thinking a lot about how we can improve it, both for me and for JMan as a whole. Thought it'd be helpful to kind of define what work-life balance means for me. So what I guess my ideal view of what I'd love to do on a week-by-week basis is I still play hockey regularly, which means training twice a week in the evenings, and then games on a Saturday. And then also would love to do as much of meeting friends and family in the weeknights as possible, as well as keeping my weekends. So hopefully that kind of sets a bit of context around what I would really like for a work-life balance. That obviously, as I'm sure all the women on the panel agree, is challenging in the industry that we're in. And there's an extent to which working beyond the 9 to 5 is expected or the norm, which is fine, but also doesn't mean that we can't do a lot better and work towards improving it and making it fit around us, which is especially relevant moving towards this more flexible work. Is there a way that we can make that norm and deliver what our clients need without it impacting what we want to achieve outside of work? So I think expected that maybe the boundaries creep a bit in our industry, but definitely think that there's stuff that we can do better. After lockdown, as I'm sure with everyone, I've been moving towards the 2 or 3 days a week in the office, which works really well for me, to be honest, in that I've got that presence and social presence physically, I guess, of coming back into the office and working with teams face to face, which obviously has its benefits, while kind of keeping that flexibility of being able to work from home where it's more convenient. So for me, I live very close to the hockey pitch, so it's nice to be able to work from home on the days where I'm training. So that, I think, for me has been a helpful balance. What I find, trying to ground this in my experience of what I find particularly challenging, definitely echo what the other two panelists and Katie have already said in terms of that feeling of presence. But for me, another lens to add to it, I think, is the fact that when you're remote, I certainly find it really challenging to maintain that positive mindset, because you can be so, and I think it's very related to the presence question, because you can be so abstracted from the team that you're working with, what you're working on, that it's very easy to kind of, I guess, internalize everything and become essentially get your mindset less positive, because haven't got that like social interaction around you to bounce off. And reflecting on that, some things that I think are helpful for me to manage that positive thinking lens to the managing the presence is just that we need to make sure we're taking that extra effort to like be interacting and be present with our colleagues. And I was thinking about ways to maybe we can do this, such as making sure that you have your video on when you're speaking with colleagues, making sure, and I think back to the presenting your real self, making sure you're having real conversations with your colleagues about how you're feeling. And maybe if you're feeling particularly negative about how a day's gone, just speaking to someone else who's working on the same project can sort of help you rationalize whether that's actually it is going badly, or that's just because you're on your own and you haven't really spoken through these things with people. And then also definitely making a big effort essentially to keep those extra things in your life that really help you become present, because all those things that we like to do outside of work definitely, in my opinion, help you be better at your job. So it's that like really prioritizing yourself and making sure you're aware of, yes, I need to exercise 3 times a week and I need to make sure I get 8 hours sleep, for example. And then really being, I guess, quite disciplined in protecting that and honest with your colleagues that that's what you need in order to bring your best self to work and be present. So slightly different lens on it, but that's my initial take on how I'm thinking about managing presence and making sure that I can still bring everything that I want to the workplace.
Thanks, Fredy. And last but not least, Shikha.
Hello, everyone. I'm Shikha, and I'm a management consultant at Oakland. I've been a career consultant. I graduated from engineering school and directly joined Accenture and have since been at a number of Big Four firms, as well as boutique consulting firms, and have worked across 3 continents, lived in 14 cities. I specialize in technology and data-led transformational programs and delivery of this. I've had the pleasure of working on quite a few interesting projects, from Obamacare, IT delivery for a large healthcare provider, to IT estate management after a Chapter 11 bankruptcy for a global brokerage firm, to doing data warehouse delivery for a insurance client, to IT divestment and IT separation after a divestment. So loads of different challenging projects with different lenses, different unknowns. By way of education, I'm an electrical engineer, as I said, and I also have an MBA. I currently call London home, where I've lived for last 10 years with my husband, and I'm very glad to be here. I've taken a slightly different lens to talk about building confidence. So when I started my career, I started as a CRM specialist, and there used to be a few software that used to be quite actively used at the time. And my confidence when I joined came from knowing the content. I wanted to be the person who knew the technology that I was supporting or helping clients implement or deliver by being the person who knows it best. But usually, as I grew with more experience, I realized the challenges are not actually related to the content most of the times. They are the unknowns, the people challenges, or things you don't always foresee. And I think that has helped me be more self-aware. So even today, in a moment of self-doubt, I usually pause, take time to reflect and say, I've not come across exactly this challenge before, but I've handled unknowns, challenges, which were different shape, different form, and I hadn't done them before. And I got through them, delivered the project, and there's no reason why. A bit of focus time, some thinking time, and breaking down the problem into smaller chunks and getting through it wouldn't get me through. So I think content can only get you so much and so far, but having faith and self-awareness that every new challenge also builds upon everything you've done in the past, has been quite helpful for me. And that's my tip.
I love that. Thank you, Shikha. We're going to move on to some of the questions that have been submitted in advance. So we're going to chip into the conversation, and please, as I mentioned, continue asking your questions and providing your feedback in the comments section too. And this first one, I'm going to initially go to Steph for. Steph, you mentioned that you worked part-time earlier on in your career. So do you have any tips for managing the pressures of being in a part-time senior position and sticking to part-time hours you are contracted for, but getting a good job done as well?
Yeah, it is challenging, that's for sure. And I think the first one would be really to be clear about what your boundaries are and to communicate them to everybody else so that everybody's aware of what your hours are, of where you have the ability to flex maybe a bit and where you don't. And there's making sure that all the people you work with are aware of those. I think that's one thing. I think the art of delegation is really important when doing that. So being sure to delegate as much as possible and to trust the people that you're working with to do that without that kind of micromanaging mindset. I think you have to do that, and you have to do that anyway as a leader. But I think especially working part-time, that's a key thing, not to feel that you're accountable or responsible for everything. Don't be afraid to say no to things, I think is really key. So that goes for everybody as well, and not particularly just part-time, but especially when you're trying to retain specific hours. I think not being afraid to say no, or at least pushing back on additional activities is really important. And I think my final one would be to ruthlessly prioritise. both from an activity perspective, but also from a meetings perspective. I think, especially when you're part-time, meetings can take up all of your day or all of your week, and you don't actually have much time to do the work you need to do. It is challenging when working part-time, because I think sometimes you feel that you're missing things by not being in meetings, and make up for that on the days you're there by accepting more meetings than you need to. But I think planning your week, ruthlessly prioritising, and make sure you're not spending all of the time in meetings would be another thing that would be helpful.
Thank you. Yeah, as you said, it's not limited to just part-time. I think we all have to have those boundaries, even when you are contracted to 40 hours a week. Yeah, it's definitely challenging enough already. Thank you, Steph. Then this is linked to what you just spoke about. So some people have ended up working longer hours now that we work from home. Has anybody got any tips to better manage time? Because it seems that expectations are higher than before, and we could easily run the risk of developing tech stress. So, Shikha, do you want to kick off with that?
So I think I agree that it has been challenging, the sudden change from office working to home working, and everyone has reacted differently. I think one of the things I soon realized was that while expectations have been higher, or expectations have been that you have to be present all the time, a lot of those are self-imposed. Is the honest answer. So if you feel comfortable and never think twice about getting a coffee and getting up from your desk and getting a coffee, or feel comfortable stopping by someone's desk and saying hello because you haven't seen them in a week, or however it is, if you don't think about those in office, why would you think about them more at work, at home, when working from home? So I think for me, the first step was to realize that not all of these expectations come from others. Some of them are self-imposed, and I can be better by myself. No one's stopping me from making sure that when I set up meetings, I only set them up for 50 minutes, give everyone, along with myself, that 10-minute break when people are back-to-back from meetings. I think the other thing, however, having said that, I think there's also generally more meetings in the diary, as not side of desk conversations or anything that you would generally do in 5 minutes when you're all present in office, have sometimes turned into meetings, blocking away your entire diary. So I think for me, actually a tip that we initially discussed in one of the forums that we have at Oakland has worked very well. Outlook, hoping most of the people these days use one, has a feature which allows you to put in focus time in your diary and randomly add that. And I think I have found that feature quite life-saving at times, because otherwise it's quite easy for your diaries to fill up and not having any time outside of meetings to actually get the work done, or just to have thinking time. So that's one. And if the days have to extend, I'm a morning person, so I don't expect everyone to be around at the time that I would try and log in. Get some of that focus time when I haven't been able to manage that in the day. However, that means I stop at a certain time in the evening, and I would turn away from the screens, sometimes even my phone, and just make sure that then I'm present with my family or friends who I'm seeing that evening. I think we made a stupid rule a few years ago, but at dinner, no technology allowed. And I think, which has really helped, it's sort of an habit now at our household. It was started by my father telling me off a few years ago that we were all sat at a table and just looking at our phones. But I think it has now become a habit, which I also think results in real conversation at home. So a few of my tips there.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't know how I feel about that no technology issue. I don't think I'd be able to commit to that. Well done to anybody that can. Thank you, Shikha. Next one. So how do I ensure I do not miss out on development opportunities and progressions whilst working from home and have limited presence in the office? And I'll turn to Frankie to kick off. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, sure. So I think for in JMAN, I think this is one that's particularly relevant because we're also this step towards working from home has been synchronized in us moving from being quite a small business where actually everybody can know everything about everyone to a business where it's not really possible. So like when decisions are being made around who should be on which project or who needs what kind of support on their development areas, that now needs to be doubly more of an active, I guess, process, for want of a better word, because it doesn't just happen naturally because everyone knows what they need to about everybody. So I think my overall take is that essentially you just need to take that extra step to make sure you're making it known to the people that need to know what you're wanting to get exposure to or get experience in, and then that then means that people are more aware of it, and therefore you're making sure and doing everything that you can to make sure that your voice is being heard in terms of the things that you're working on, the things that you'd really like to get exposure to, and what next steps that you'd like to make. And I think for me, the obvious one for that is that if you've got support set up, like managers, for example, who are the ones who are responsible for coaching you or your career development, really making sure that you've made it super clear for them what you're looking for at the moment, and then they can essentially be your advocate in those conversations, so you're not just relying on this kind of osmosis effect. That I think is my take on it, and the main observation from my experience at JMAN is that osmosis effect that we've already talked about a lot, where there's just conversations in the office around what somebody's doing and someone's doing a great job in this. I think this would be the great next step for them, just aren't really happening as much. So I think that having it in your mind that you therefore need to take that extra step to make sure that you need to be heard. And I also, my other thought around this is that actually I think this is related to the being really present on calls point as well. I think it's particularly easy to not be present in the more casual calls, whether it's like a team catch up or a catch up of people at your level in the business, just to be like, oh, well, this is not actually that valuable to me because I've got this really busy client work to do. But if you're really making the effort to be present in those conversations, you then keep that sort of broader awareness of what's going on. You can ask the questions, which shows the people running the meetings that you're interested in something. And that although it feels on the surface that's not the most valuable meetings and conversations to be present in, I think it really can add towards that, giving yourself the opportunity to get exposure to the things that you need for your development and for your interests. So I think that's another observation that I think is really helpful for me.
I think that's so important, Freddie. One of the things I was going to follow up and say, don't be afraid to, if you are mainly working from home and people are in the office, don't be afraid to put time in people's diaries as a social catch-up. That is as important as a part of your relationship building as kind of the transactional work side of things. So I think maintaining those social connections, even if it's a virtual cup of tea or something like that, is really important as well.
Yeah.
It's also that the open dialogue point. I've seen it referred somewhere as proximity bias, as in, before pandemic, it's not something new, where you're present more. Those who weren't present or perhaps had home working as part of their working arrangements, their achievements weren't recognized as much. And this thing that's been rolling, but hopefully the way we're working now has helped. But I think that open dialogue with managers and your team is very important in terms of development and progression.
Thank you. I have to make a public apology, and it links to my next question, actually. We talked earlier. It's Fredy, not Frankie. So I apologise for that firstly. But nice tie into one of the questions, which is around managing pressure digitally. Do online events feel less pressured or more challenging? And my original answer was going to be that I actually feel more comfortable online events, apart from when I make mistakes because I'm under pressure, clearly. But I think it's really personality based, and I like being well prepared for things, and like having digital means to communicate with people that I can have notes of the points that I want to cover off, and I feel more confident in that environment. And I struggled transitioning after the pandemic to being face to face and actually having meetings in person, and remembering that you are confident enough and you know your topic well enough to actually just talk about it without being overly prepared. So it's only actually now that I'm just moving past that and feel more comfortable and less pressure in person as well. So I was very pro digital events and enjoyed them a lot more. But yeah, I'm enjoying now feeling more comfortable in a face-to-face environment too. Anybody else have any thoughts on pressured digital events? Do you feel more pressure in person or online? Obviously, we're all part of a digital event now.
It's going back.
No, go on, Stephanie.
Just going back to face-to-face events is challenging because you're often talking to people that you don't know. And I think that when you're talking to people in a networking type of event, actually having those conversations with people you don't know and you don't know anything about them is a skill, and it's one that we've sort of lost, I think, over the last couple of years, because most people we talk to in digital kind of world are people that we already know. So it can be quite challenging, I think, moving back to that environment.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So the women face ageism in the workplace on top of strong misogyny, racism, and undermining. How would you like this to be addressed by organisations and on an individual basis? Steph, any?
I think thinking about the ageism, I think there can be, both from an organisational perspective and actually from an individual perspective, too much of a focus on each of the individual lenses that we look at diversity across. So what are we doing about gender? What are we doing about age? What are we doing about, all of those different things? And I think it's best, and I would look for organisations to actually look to value people for the work that they do and for the outcomes that they deliver, irrespective of all of those things. And I think if we can help organisations to sort of engender that culture of really looking at outcomes and the way that people do their job rather than all of those individual aspects, I think that would be a way of ensuring people are valued for the job that they do rather than the things that they are.
Thank you. This one is a question that comes up often, and I'm sure we've all spent a good chunk of time thinking about, and I'll go to Nikki to kick off the answer to this one. But how do you handle imposter syndrome?
Big question. I mean, when I think about the meaning and the way that concept's developed over time, doubting your abilities, feeling like you're about to be found out for this kind of big fool. I was thinking, well, how have I experienced that? Have I experienced that? And I think I've at least felt it very sort of close, sitting closely next to me, whispering in my ear at times when I'm in an unfamiliar situation or I'm not sure of the outcome. And my answer to it, or my response, has always been the same. I just throw myself at that uncomfortable situation. And that, I know, sounds obvious, but it's probably my top tip on how to handle imposter syndrome. Because what's the alternative? If you let that notion and that feeling submerge you, it can paralyze you. It can paralyze progression, innovation, that sort of feeling of failure or how you're going to be perceived. And, you might stumble along the way, you might make mistakes. And I think often after that feeling of discomfort, that experience, there's growth that follows. And that's certainly been my experience. I think, in some ways, if you've not felt that discomfort, perhaps for a prolonged period of time, or you've not at least sat on the peripheries of imposter syndrome, it might be a sign that you're not being challenged. And I think, if within the topic, if we're talking about work-life balance, it's just so important to me. And I think a lot of people, that they feel invigorated, fulfilled, and they spend their time feeling and doing things that make them feel like that. I will say that I think imposter syndrome can be heightened in situations where you're the only one of something, like the only woman in a room or situation. I've been in those situations where it's, there's all men in the room, particularly when I was a younger lawyer. I remember being in this in this sort of networking briefing, and part of my remit was to build business as well as run the cases. And the conversation turned to some male event that was happening. This is yonks ago. And as they were talking, I increasingly felt uncomfortable, like I shouldn't be in the room, because I was being excluded from that discussion, and it turned quite kind of raucous. It's a male-only event. We're going to drink beer on the coach and go to the races. And I just sat there thinking, well, that's not fair. Sounds like there's business opportunity there. I'm here to build the employment work within the law firm. But another part of me felt, well, I've got my pride. I don't go to parties or to someone's house without being invited. So it was but that prevailing thought of, but there's work opportunities, made me speak out within this room of senior lawyers. And I asked who was going to attend the event. CEO of this company, CEO of that company. And I just put forward the reasons why I should go, because there's opportunity and there's potential for new business. And I went to the event, and I can't remember whether I secured business or not, but it was just so important to me to speak louder than that sort of voice saying you shouldn't be going, don't, keep things quiet, and just to speak louder than that kind of imposter syndrome voice. So I just think, just grab it and kind of go for it. And my other quick tip is that your own story is so important, and it's important to keep your own story strong. That's what justifies the why you're there, and it's your blueprint. No one else can mimic that, and not to compare yourself to someone else's story, even if they proclaim that theirs is superior.
Thank you. I love that. Very inspirational. This links to that. We've had a question come in from Mia, and Mia asks, can you provide suggestions of how women can empower other women, both remotely and in the workplace? I would say my pledge this year for International Women's Day was to celebrate other women's achievements. And we actually had an event in the office last night, and we talked about this there as well, that sometimes that can come across as boastful as a woman, and we don't like to be our own cheerleaders. So I'd say we can all support each other by celebrating other people's achievements, other women's achievements, even if we're not comfortable doing it for ourselves. So that would be my main tip there.
Nice. I can add another thought if that works. This is not necessarily specifically women, but I think another way to kind of, I guess, celebrate someone and make sure their voice is being heard is to make sure you're being aware of, if you're in a room full of a lot of people or a video call full of a lot of people, and you notice that someone isn't contributing, to make sure that you're kind of calling to them to offer their opinion, especially if it's something that you think that that person has a strong opinion on. It might just be that they don't think that they're valid to speak up on it, when actually and everybody else would be very interested to hear their opinion. So I think making that effort to call on someone if you get the feeling that they might not be confident enough to speak up themselves is a really good way to empower someone.
Thanks, Fredy. Reflecting on your career to date, would you have done anything differently? If so, what and why?
Well, this is one of the sort of pre-sent questions, and I was thinking about this and find it quite difficult, because I try and live by that sort of mantra: no regrets. There's just experiences and the things you learn from it. But there are things, and it might just be age, but there are things that have become clearer with hindsight. And again, they do sound cliche, but I think my main one, the thing that I've learnt most, is to trust your instincts. Because, and that's in every capacity, sort of, as a lawyer, business owner, every sort of stage of my career, because there's a reason why you feel that, It's your kind of indicator. It can mean that, you know, a partnership's not right, or a decision, and or your core values, business values, aren't aligned to a decision or someone, a partnership that you're going into. And I think, you know, as women, there may have been, you know, I've often felt a lack of confidence to do that, because it involves it just doesn't feel right, and that assumption, or that kind of perception that you're being emotional, as opposed to having killer instincts, which is perhaps a label more attached to male leaders or men in business. So I think, you know, I've developed the confidence to say, actually, I don't know, let it sit with me, and then I could perhaps apply the logic after, because the logic does sometimes come after that feeling that, you know, something's not quite right. And I think you need a marriage of both instinct and logic, because without the logic, it might sound like a Fruit Loop. So I think it's another cliche, it's kind of obvious one, but I think the instinct is just so important in everything you do. And it might not be right for the company, it might not be right for you, which is why it's there.
Thank you. Yeah, it comes back to your point earlier about owning your own blueprint. You've got your story that which has resulted in you being in a room having a conversation. So yeah, own that. And
yeah, and I think, you know, within the topic, I don't, work-life balance isn't just about, you know, the division of time. I've often, when I've had sleepless nights, or I'm just feeling really anxious, it's because something's going against that instinct, and it bleeds into other areas of my life. You know, when I'm trying to sleep, or just sort of at home, it's there, you know. So it does affect your balance.
thank you. Seeing what questions have come in. We had a really interesting question pre-submitted as well, and we've got people here that have worked in very big companies as well as smaller ones, as we found out when everyone gave their introduction. So whomever would like to answer this, how do you manage to make yourself visible and heard in a large company of 6,000 plus employees made up of 90% male staff? It often feels as if you have to work twice as hard to be seen half as much. Very interesting.
I was thinking about it earlier, and I think finding your niche and not being afraid to share it with others. It doesn't have to be always related to content, as I started, say, be a CRM specialist. It could be you're really passionate about inclusion and diversity, or you're passionate about something else that happens internally within your firm. It could be anything. But I think that not doing things that you just want to do to be present, but finding something that you're genuinely passionate about, which also makes it easier to be known for that thing in the firm. So if I just do inclusion and diversity because I want to be present, it is probably not going to work. But finding something that you're passionate about, which is not necessarily just work for you, and then doing that can give you a way to find presence while not making it sound like, or for you to feel like it's work, because it's very difficult to keep up with sort of pretenses or just doing something because you have to do it. So I think that for me can give you presence despite being in a larger firm for that one thing.
Thank you, Shikha. Yeah, the genuine aspect, the authenticity.
Yeah, I really agree with that, because, and it's, you know, it doesn't matter how big the organization, if you've got, particularly where you've got a large percentage of men, or another group, you know, you can often feel the pressure to conform or even to mimic certain behaviors, and that won't make you, you know, recognizable, memorable, or anything. Coming forward with your own, you know, your unique conversation or whatever it might be, it's so important.
Thank you. What effective tools to manage pressure exist and how can they be used?
I think effective tools is very much dependent on the individual. I think we've throughout the last couple of years had a number of conversations with people about how they manage pressure, and I think for everybody it's different. It might be exercise, as we've talked about. It might be mindfulness. It might be spending time with your children. I think that the tool is to make sure that you dedicate enough time on your week to do that, and make sure that you are looking after yourself. So whatever it is that helps you with your pressure, whether that is exercise or just taking some time out, I think planning to make time for that in your week and making that as important to you as anything else in your diary is important.
Thanks, Steph. Going back to the point of focus time, you need focus time for other things that aren't involving work. Thank you. This is a really interesting one. How can I be a true ally, seeing as I am male, other than calling out misogyny when I hear or see it? How can men be better allies?
I can start with a comment. I think it's just it would be really helpful if and this is also not calling out anything specifically, but if for example there's a conversation about new cohorts taken into a business, it to be a male that brings up the fact that, oh, that's really interesting that it's actually slightly male heavy. Is that something we should be thinking about? Because when it's that, like, sort of what we should be aiming for, I think is fairly well known, and people understand why we're looking for that in general, I think. But it's just, I think it would be really helpful for those sorts of, oh yeah, that's really interesting that actually that's male heavy, should it be, to come from a man rather than always coming from a woman.
And I think all the things that we talked about earlier, Katie, you talked about celebrating successes. We talked about bringing people into the room. That men can do that as well as women, and celebrate women's successes. And that's I think also, so the allyship piece is positive, not just calling out the things that are negative, I think.
Yeah, totally agree.
Very true. Thank you. I work in an environment where leadership roles on site are male dominated. What are your top 5, they've called out, confidence boosting tips so I can boost my confidence, be heard for my potential progression and get noticed? Which we've answered through some of the other questions, but does everyone have their one tip, their confidence boosting tip?
I think I covered my biggest one would be just being self-aware and not too much in your head. I think we tend to overthink the negative things or why something wouldn't be wrong. Mm-hmm. To Nikki's point, if your gut says you know this and you can do it, just do it. Just don't overthink it. And I think being assertive and just going with the gut would get you far, I think.
I think following on from that, if you're in a meeting and you have an idea, don't be afraid to be the first person to say it. I think waiting for other people to have said their ideas and then talk to yours is something that we see quite often. So I think not being afraid to have your idea and be the first person to talk in the room. Talk to your idea and make it the focus. I think would be mine. And the more you do it, the easier it is.
Mm-hmm. Mine linked to that would be don't be afraid to ask questions. Sometimes I had previously had been afraid that asking questions makes me seem incompetent and that I don't know all of the answers, but you don't need to know all of the answers, and actually learning more builds confidence, obviously, because you have more information available to you. And most people in the room are thinking the same thing as well. So want to hear the answer. So yeah, that's one thing I've had to learn.
Yeah, I'm I just, as a business owner, when I see people asking questions, curiosity is so important, and that's the thing that's been quashed in the past. None of us, know everything, so it's so important today. It just demonstrates an interest and a want to learn more and progress your knowledge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Thank you.
Sorry, Katie, just
that's all right.
Something to add to that. I think for me, positive reinforcement's quite big. So I'd encourage people to, if they're not sure how they're doing on something or think they need a bit of a confidence boost, just to ask someone that you trust the opinion of, how am I doing? I'm feeling like I'm not really sure whether I'm doing a good job here. Just getting that positive reinforcement can often just give you that little confidence boost that you need to push on.
Thank you. Got time for one more question. This is linked to some of the things that we have been asked before, and it came in during the live event, but I don't know if anybody's got any further comments on it. How do you give multiple work streams sufficient time for strategic thought and not find yourself overworked in the evenings or on weekends? And I think it's that strategic thought, giving yourself the space, the thinking time. How do people give themselves that space to do the thinking rather than managing only doing the doing?
I think Steph touched on it earlier, that if you've got the resource and ability to delegate some of the things, a kind of thought of where's my time best allocated. It's so important. The thing of time as a currency has become, I've really recognized that over time. So delegating certain things that you know perhaps someone else can do better, and not trying to take control over everything. Because strategic thinking, you're right. I mean, it does need that space in your mind. And I think the other thing is communication is so important, almost like an internal service level agreement. Or it might be external. Communicating with clients, for instance, and managing their expectations can then have that back impact of managing your work and not over-promising in terms of deadlines, and reflecting that internally is very important as well. Being realistic with that.
I think we've talked about it a little bit, but the piece around diary management and prioritizing your time, having space in your diary, and I have a space in my diary which just says thinking, and actually just have that space, and don't be worried to take yourself out away from the laptop and just go for a walk. You're going for a walk for an hour and you're thinking, that's still work. You're still delivering, because it gives you the space to have more creative ideas, and you're not forever just kind of doing the thing or trying to get your inbox down. And so making the time to do that and not feeling guilty about doing that, I think, is important.
I totally agree with that, Stephanie. I think the that taking yourself away, is quite easy to forget that things like responding to emails, responding to Teams messages, all those like really small tasks that have crept in, that are like creeping up and up in how much it takes time in our day. Actually being disciplined around, right, this is my thinking time. I'm not going to respond to any emails in the next hour. I'm not going to answer any team messages, is really helpful, because that kind of flicking back and forth in your mind can really affect the productivity that you have in that time that you've allocated.
Definitely, but to Nikki's point, you need to make that contract with yourself.
Yeah.
It's often us, it's our own selves that stop us doing it, not external factors. So making sure you focus on that. Yeah.
Definitely.
Thank you, everyone. We're at the end of the event. Some brilliant points covered, and hopefully everyone has taken lots from that conversation and got some practical tips as well about how we manage pressure and presence in the workplace. So thank you, panelists. You've been amazing, and we'd love to continue the conversation. So we're all on LinkedIn. Please reach out if anybody in the audience would like to chat any more about this or anything else. And also a reminder that if you're a member of CMI, you can log on to Management Direct, and the link is in the chat. You'll see that there, where you can find lots of other practical development resources too. And if you're not a subscriber, you will have seen also a link to join the CMI community and get invites for other events like this, and a whole host of other interesting resources too. So let us know what you thought about today's event in the chat column in the last couple of minutes. And on that point, just thank you for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.